Well, good afternoon, everyone. They finally did turn the air conditioning on in here. It's a bit warm, but
just the fans.
Pardon me?
Just the fans. The air conditioners are being worked on today. The coils in this building are in maintenance.
Right. Do you have the clicker?
I do.
You do. Okay, good. Well, so welcome everyone. We've got a fairly short presentation to give you, and then we'd be happy to answer questions once we're finished. I'm going to do the first few slides, and then Tom will take over, and then Dave will finish off. So as protocol, know that you'll be able to see this presentation online and review it over and over and over again, as I'm sure you can, particularly if you're insomniac. That'll put you to sleep, I'm sure. And then the fact that you're here indicates that you have provided your consent. Okay? So what I'm going to do is give you a quick overview of our budget letter that we've received from Minister Moe, given to the chair of our board of directors. And he's outlined 5 specific areas that he'd like the University of Regina to focus on. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, I'd like to encourage you. There's the website, and of course you can get that address if you go online and look at this presentation. I would encourage you to read it. It's not long, but I would encourage you to read it to get a sense of the detail of what he's after. But what I'd like to do very, very quickly is just give you a sense of what each one of these points are referring to. The first one, accessibility. Here what the government is after is allowing students to have greater accessibility to the university. And the first point that he talks about is financial support. So this is financial support for First Nations Métis, students with disabilities, and mature students, as well as international students. Second point under accessibility was student safety. Third was to make sure that we review our mechanisms for student support, mental health, financial support, as well as mental health, and so on. The second point, responsiveness. Here what the minister is after in his statement is that the university in its programs, as well as in its research, is responsive to the needs of society, needs of community, as well as economic needs of the province. He talks about completion rates and making sure that we have appropriate programming for the demands of students and the public. Next point is sustainability. This is essentially belt-tightening recommendations for the university, asking us to provide more detail in terms of 3-year revenue forecasts, multi-year capital plans, and as you've all heard in the news, making sure that we're not duplicating programs with the U of S and other post-secondary institutions. Looking at program review and making sure that we're responsive to those program reviews. Accountability, this is requesting that we're transparent about the plans we're undertaking, making sure that we are providing information of how we're approaching the goals and objectives that we're suggesting. Other details that you can read later, things like making sure that we're providing board packages to the government earlier than has been the case. And the final one is quality, and this is all about improving the quality of the university, improving the quality of our rankings, broad brush, accreditation, I mean things that we do anyway, but also gathering information from students and employers, and then acting on those bits of information to make sure that our research, our programs, our degrees, our certificates are in line with what society is after from us. So with that, I'll encourage you to read the letter yourself, and then I'll hand it over to Tom.
Thanks, Dave. So just a couple of things there. If you look at the budget letter, you'll see a sheet of figures and several appendices which detail targeted funding for things like French language education, for things like the operating costs and the RIC Center and so on. And all of that detail is part of the budget letter, and the budget letters are up on the budget letter webpage from the university main page. Simply type that into the main search box. So, as you've heard in the news, for the province's 2 universities, the overall allocation remained unchanged. And therefore, though we asked in last year's operations forecast for a 4.4% increase to the operating grant, we got a 0% increase, but we did get some good news in that overall share, our share of the allocation to the two universities increased very slightly to the tune of $997,000. So nearly $1 million, which would be roughly equivalent to just less than 1% on the grant. So we've just given you some detail here as to why that funding shift has taken place, and it really has to do with better performance over the past number of years. The SUFM, the Saskatchewan University Funding Mechanism, works through a series of rolling five-year averages, so that if we have one very, very good year, it's not as if we get excellent treatment the following year. It looks at our rolling averages over a period of time. But our enrollment growth, which everybody in the room knows about, has resulted in a shift of public funding to the University of Regina of $750,000. An increase in tenured and tenure-track faculty over the same period has resulted in an additional $64,000 to the U of R. An increase in the number of research graduate students, that is those doing things like MSCs, those doing degrees that involve research rather than the course-based master's programs, has attracted an additional $228,000 and an increase in CIHR funding over a 5-year average of $165,000. Our struggles right now with NSERC, and you know there's a lot of debate about that, both within the Faculty of Science and the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science, but nationally, about NSERC and smaller universities, lots of debate about that, hit us with a negative 153, and a decrease in overall research expenditures over that period. We had a steep increase last year, particularly in graduate funding, graduate scholarship funding, not yet reflected in that, down $92,000. But overall, $997,000 to the good, or as I said, roughly equivalent to an additional 1% on the grant.
Tom, and part of this, everyone, is SHIRK. We're up slightly in SHIRK.
Yeah. The other thing we should mention, you will recall midway through the last fiscal, when the government realized that it was in a financial situation that it hadn't anticipated, particularly with regard not just to commodity prices, but the firefighting costs in the north, there was a callback of money. In our case, it was $600,000 and some, if memory serves. And our question at the time was, will that be a permanent reduction to our base budget allocation? It was not the case. That has been restored. So we're level on that. That's the hint there. Unchanged from the original 2015 allocation, plus the additional 997. So the U of R allocation for SIOS scholarships is $1.246 million. The government's made very clear that it wants the universities in Saskatchewan to do all they can to provide financial aid where possible to students who need that financial aid. So those are available for graduate student scholarships, or that part of it increases by $63,000 one time in recognition of fundraising success we've had. And as you know, we've put some investments into fundraising in the last couple of years. That's beginning to bear fruit. And as Kim McKechnie and his crew will tell you, fundraising is going to become more and more important to this campus as the operating grant revenues shift in coming years. The Advantage Scholarship Program is unchanged. Last year, $383,000 more than our 2015-16 budget, and we estimate roughly $3 million in those scholarships for 2016-17. You would also have seen a graphic, I believe it was part of the operations forecast or one of the budget documents last year, that showed the University of Regina among Canadian comprehensives to be the second highest in student support. And the highest at that point was Memorial University in Newfoundland. Obviously, that was stemming from a time when Memorial was very flush with money from the government of Newfoundland on oil revenues. That has all shifted with the fall in price of oil. And it's theoretically possible, we don't know this yet, that we'll be very close to the top position or possibly the top position in the country, depending on how much Memorial has cut back its aid to students. And Memorial was clawed back about a month ago, $8 million in operating funding because of fiscal difficulties in Newfoundland. And finally, you all heard, I'm sure, in the budget announcement, the graduate retention program, which gives an interest-free loan of $10,000 toward a down payment. It's very much part of the strategy, not just to recruit and recruit, train, and graduate HQP in Saskatchewan, but to try to retain those people in the province, whether they come from outside the country or outside the province, to educate them here, graduate them here, and then part of the strategy is to retain them in the workforce.
Hey, maybe before we change slides, I'll also close the loop on one thing that was in the Sask Party platform. That was the Sask Advantage Scholarship, where they said if they, once they get sufficient funding and things like that, they would be increasing that from the current $500 level, I believe, to $750. They have reconfirmed in the budget letters and in the announcements that that won't happen. They don't have that this year. They still have it at top of mind, but not funded this year. Some of the things that were funded, though, I'll speak a little bit to the capital side of things. First of all, what used to be called sustaining capital, which is now called preventive maintenance and renewal. I guess the good news is that it remained the same, so it didn't drop at all. Bad news is that it didn't increase, so it stays at what we consider a significantly low level at just over $5 million. So we'll be getting that again this year and allocating it as part of the budget process. They've also announced that they had, you may recall, 2 years ago, they started a special strategic PMR project fund, which 2 years ago was started at $2 million. Last year it increased to $3 million. And this year it stays at $3 million, but they're already identified that this year that $3 million will probably go to support strategic initiatives funding projects that the government will need to support. So we don't anticipate getting any of that money at all. Last year's allocation, by the way, only half of it, well, 1.6 out of the 3 was allocated, as the other amount ended up being part of the provincial savings and reduced the amount of clawback that we would have gotten otherwise. So, and if you're monitoring closely on the budget letters, you'll see a line item where we get 1.917 million in capital as well. And of course, this is going to pay borrowing that the government had authorized on the base sustaining capital or base PMR that came in the form of borrowing, and they've been paying back all of the universities, or at least paying our mortgage of those amounts as per their commitment. So that's not new money, that's just paying for old money. And on the major capital side, no new special initiatives, but I'll talk a little bit more of how the province is assisting us on the next slide. But before we do that, you might notice in italics at the bottom, we actually, from some really good work from our folks in financial services, thinking ahead a number of years back, I think it was 6 years ago, took and challenged the Canada Revenue Agency on how GST was being calculated. In fact, our model here, in terms of how much we actually get an education rebate for activity on the major capital side, and the way we interpret it was challenged by CRA. They said we had to change our way. We said we disagree. Basically put the appeal in at that point. Paid as CRAs tends to do. They want their money up front. So we actually paid a $250,000 correction at that particular time. We've been pursuing it along with some colleagues at U of A and U of C in particular through the courts. We won our court case back about 6 months ago. We've already received that $250,000 back that we had paid from that initial appeal, and we're now retroactively making claims for the years between then and now, and hope to get a total of about $1 million, which of course will be applied to the I'll talk about now. This will be helpful because it adds a couple of percent less on GST. So good news, still not definitive, but all good signals. We've announced at the past forums and at Executive Council and some other places that we're putting an application in for strategic investment funds. We actually submitted 4 projects. We've heard for sure that 1 is ineligible. So the classroom upgrade project that we're working on to try and upgrade the classrooms for in advance of Congress and things is not eligible. So for sure we won't be getting money on that. But we're getting extremely good signals on the College Avenue campus renewal project, of which we submitted for $30 million, matched by the university for another 30. So an additional $60 million. We know that there's some costs to take and deliver that project that are ineligible. So we're estimating that it'll be at least $62.5 million if it's successful. And we'll hear about that in the next 3 weeks or so, is our guess. By the end of the month, we anticipate hearing. So lots of different things, huge challenges. It all has to be delivered and spent and billed back to the federal government, since it's a way of trying to drive economic growth. They want the money spent quickly. So that's a bit of a challenge. So those of you that are engaged at College Avenue campus, and there's been special briefings by Harvey King as the director to the staff up there, or you may hear it on the street. We've got people out actively pursuing items that are on the critical path for that particular project. We've got public meetings, public hearings. We had a media event yesterday. We had a donor event on Monday. Public meetings on both the 16th and the 23rd of June. Because some of the things that are on the critical path are things like finding space for the people that are working in there now. To be able to get the renovation started, we need to find places to run the programs and for the staff at CCE to work. And also demolition. There's a couple of buildings that are beyond, they don't have any restorative value. So the gallery in the back end of the conservatory. And so we're having public hearings on that as well. So you might hear some about that. One of the things that once this is all delivered, and this is a place where it actually helps our operating budget as well. Right now we're spending about $180,000 a year just renting space for Johnson Chama. Well, once we get this College Avenue campus project completed, they'll be able to move back to their intended home, and we'll be saving that in the operating budget as well as them having a fantastic new accommodation. You would have heard of something else in the media as well, and this is something that we've been working on for a little while and has come to some very successful fruition. Last January, we had a public request for proposals to take and identify a private partner. After the campus master planning process, it was identified that there were 3 different sites up at College Avenue campus that we could take and lever the value of the land to help protect and preserve those heritage buildings. And as a result, we got a fantastic submission from an excellent partner, a community-based financial institution, Connexus, all member-owned, who has the same values and things like that we have. So they'll be contributing $8.25 million towards the overall project, and of course, helping with accessibility and improving Dark Hall and just enhancing that campus overall. So public consultations on that part as well. We'll also be talking about demolition, and of course, it's hard for people to differentiate between all of these projects, but they're really 2 quite distinct projects. They just both happen to be, because of the federal Strategic Investment Fund project and the R4P and Connexus all coming at the same time. These 2 independent projects will make for a buzz of activity up at College Avenue. Now, if things couldn't get any better, this is another one that we're optimistic on. Dark Hall is already under construction. We've collected over $7 million worth of donor funding, and $3 million of that we've committed to do some work. So back in the middle of May, they started construction, working on what we call the envelope of the building. So the roof, the front steps, the some of the brickwork, etc. So it's actually closed down right now, and that $3 million worth of activity will go on. But there's another federal initiative that focuses on cultural institutions, so we're optimistic we'll be making an application. We're optimistic that we might be getting some funding later on to actually get even further on Dark Hall than the activities. Connexus will already help us do a fair bit at Dark Hall. The initial SIF funding application had Dark Hall in it. In discussions with the federal government indicate that it also, major parts of it are ineligible as well because there's a cultural program. So they're not funding it under the innovation program, but they will consider funding it under the cultural one. So we had to pull those parts out. So good news on it. We'll be working hard to get that application in for September 15th. So those are the capital things.
So what's to come? The board meets on the 5th and 6th of July to finalize the budget. The main unknowns at this point, the numbers that are still unknown, are of course our enrollments for next year. Right now they're tracking fairly well. Enrollment, that is tuition and fee revenue, is climbing now to very close to 40 cents on the operating dollar. That is every $1,000 we spend in the operating budget, 400 now comes from tuition and fees, roughly speaking. That's climbing to that. And we don't know yet what the final numbers are. We will know in week 2 of September, but right now it's looking relatively good. There are a couple of areas in which we're behind, and we're working with those areas to ensure that qualified students are admitted in time. The other unknown on tuition and fees is the mix between international and domestic. As everyone's aware, there's a different tuition fee structure for international undergraduates, and the revenue scheme there depends very much on the mix. One of our challenges on that side is the areas of greatest growth over the past couple of years, the areas that drove the kind of growth that you saw reflected in the SUFM adjustment are now effectively at capacity or past full. Engineering and nursing. There's been growth in science as well, growth in kinesiology, which is a smaller faculty. But one of the things that we're trying to get our minds around is that those areas don't have a lot of capacity right now, and further growth we're going to have to be quite strategic about. So that's one number we don't know. The other major number we don't know is what the board will approve in terms of a percentage increase in tuition. If you look at the operations forecast, we have said tentatively 3.8% on average. The board may accept that or they may reject that and send us back to the drawing board on tuition. For comparative purposes, the University of Saskatchewan has put up tuition an average of 2.5%, but the University of Saskatchewan is much less reliant than we are on tuition and fee revenue, so it's a smaller proportion of their budget. However, once the board has approved the budget and we know what it's actually going to look like, we're going to have a town hall the very next day in the Rick Theatre. Kim, do we know the time?
11 o'clock.
There we go, 11 o'clock in the morning, thank you. So we will get the news out to you as quickly as possible, and the detailed budget letter which goes out to the faculties and all of the operating units will again be made public so that you'll be able to see every budget change made in all of those units once the board has approved that budget. We've also continued to have consultations, of course, with the Council Committee on Budget. Its next meeting and the last meeting before the board meets is Monday the 26th or 27th of June, whatever that final Monday in June is, and we'll be meeting with them again. So we invite you to the next budget town hall in Rick. I'm not sure we can guarantee air conditioning, but I think it's more hopeful in Rick as a newer building. And we're quite happy now to take any questions you might have. If we can answer them, we will. If we can't answer, we'll find the answer and get them to you. And as Dave said at the outset, once again, this is being video recorded. So if you do have some questions, you come up to the microphones, please identify yourself. Let people watching who may see only your back or the back of your head because the cameras are up there, let them know who you are and what unit you're with. We'll answer any questions that we can, and if we can't, as I say, we'll come back to you with the answer. Thank you for coming. Floor is open for questions.
thank you guys for taking the time to talk to us. I really
Who are you?
appreciate that. I'm Misty Longman. I work in the Aboriginal Student Center here at the university. Is that good?
Yeah,
My status number is, just joking, I won't go that far. So this is, I've kind of in the last couple of years taken the opportunity to be more engaged in our budget discussions, and so I'm not really fluent, so I might be asking something very redundant. I'm assuming, which we know we're assuming can get you at times, that we do every year get a letter from our minister as to what their expectations are. So when you look at the expectations, and for me in my role in the institution, responsiveness and accessibility clearly impact the FNMI groups that I work with, even the non-Aboriginal or the international students that come into our space oftentimes. So what, as an institution, are our general strategies to work with the expectations that are put on us by the minister on an annual basis? And in terms of these ones, which I'm assuming they vary, annually. Yeah. So how do we see ourselves, given what we're given with our budgets, how do we see ourselves adapting and ensuring the accessible components and the responsiveness to our student components as a larger community? So you guys working with us and us working with you. And then I guess that would also kind of go into our transparency of our processes and stuff. Where do you see us all going forward to meet these expectations with what we're given?
Great question, Misty. I'll kick off by saying the expectations you see in the minister's letter are remarkably similar to many of the elements that we have already got in our strategic plan: student success, research impact, commitment to communities, and the two threads of indigenization and sustainability. Between those, and then with a lot of the supporting actions that are in that Peak Aski Kikawina, you see much of what the minister is speaking of. So should we, as a campus community, continue to allocate more resources where possible to student supports, to student financial support, to student mental health, to student advising, to ensure that students who are able to can get through their degrees and graduate, which is a very key goal of the government of Saskatchewan. Their interest is to see students not just come to university but graduate. I would say we're fully in alignment with them there. Student success, again, is a key part of that strat plan. One of the things then that we need to work on is to provide perhaps even more assistance to students who could succeed but who continue to fall through the cracks, students who are between faculties, students who, through perhaps no fault of their own, are suffering circumstances impeding academic success. And we're trying to find ways with very, very limited resources to help those students succeed, because it's important to try to retain every qualified student we can, for the simple reason that's a duty of ours as put upon us by the people who fund us, but it's also much less expensive to retain a student than it is to recruit a student into the institution.
Yeah, and I agree. And I see with our, sorry, no one's lining up, so I'm just going to keep talking for a minute. I see how you're right, you're absolutely right. Our strategic plans and what we're saying we want to do align very well. And we're very fortunate that we're on the same page as our ministers and our overall province, but we want, but do we have any tangible examples of how we see ourselves doing that with what we've been given? Like, do we have, we're going to create communication strategies and we're going to build this committee or a subcommittee, like we're going to incorporate this and do this. Do we have any tangible ideas, or do we have a plan to do something? Like, do we have an action task force plan set aside to start making sure that all this is happening with what we've been given?
So let me give you maybe one set of examples, and my colleagues may want to kick in some more. But on the strategic thread of indigenization, as you know, over the past 5 years, the Aboriginal Student Centre has been expanded with additional funding and additional staffing. In last year's budget, the executive lead indigenization position has been made base budgeted, so that's now a permanent position. We will hope to have by fall a real little nucleus of activity around indigenization and better support for Indigenous students, which is an incredibly important part of student success and social responsiveness in a province like that. So that would be one thing. Another very specific thing would be the supports we're putting into student advising to help students who are really struggling because of academic difficulties in one area or of just not finding a faculty home. We feel that there are a substantial number of students who can be retained. So we've established in John Smith's operation a small central advising units specifically dedicated for people like that. And there are a whole series of other initiatives around retention, around what we call the gateway courses or the threshold courses with unusually high failure rates. We're asking faculties to look and see what we might do to reduce those failure rates without reducing academic standards. and various things like that. The additional support given to research graduate students last year, an additional $500,000 in funding support, would be another area in terms both of student success and of research impact, and so on and so forth. And there may be others.
Yeah, if I could just maybe answer it tangentially.
For sure.
I'd like to talk about the UVAR Press. It's really become a beacon for First Nations dissemination of research, particularly in the humanities and partially social sciences. In the last 2 years, we've had 3 #1 bestsellers, all with First Nations content coming out of the UVAR Press. We have Indigenous language, and what Bruce Walsh is trying to do is have UVAR being the repository of Indigenous language here on campus based on his the publishing of those books. So I really see the U of R Press being a beacon for First Nations Métis literature as well as storytelling, language, and so on. So if we want to point to one fabulous success story, the press is it's the first thing I think of. And I'm going to be meeting with our new Indigenous lead very shortly to talk about research, Indigenous research in general. So.
Oh, she'd love that. That's right up her alley. I appreciate the specific to Indigenous, but just so everyone knows, I was thinking also student affairs, so it's, I appreciate that.
I'll maybe provide some comments, maybe just talk a little bit about process, because I think that was part of your question as well. Some good examples, but also how's it work. Every year, 1st of July becomes a new performance year. Everyone gets assessed. Everyone should have individual performance objectives within their own performance review, but they're clearest and most obvious at the top. So the president right now is working on this year's set of performance objectives, which will be approved or modified by the board at the July board meeting. And then she will carry on to report on those each and every board meeting throughout the entire year, as she has done every year in the past. And so, and you will see those, they will include each of the 3 pillars and elements of that with specific deliverables and objectives, and each of the 2 threads, and then they'll be identified as her targets, which are basically institutional targets, but they're her targets specifically, and then they'll be reported on at each and every meeting as well.
Well, thank you so much. One more question, and then I'll stop.
Sure.
In the spirit of going back to the transparency, as you're already providing really amazing examples, and Blair's going to be another top seller, because that's an amazing book, just so we're all clear. It's the book I was most excited for in the history of Europress, and pre them, formerly known as, really long title, right? So in the spirit of transparency, I think, and not even transparency, I think even communication and cohesiveness and collectiveness, community culture, is it possible for us at a midway point to kind of release something through the strategic plan committee who had come together to facilitate it, to say, this is where we started, this is what we asked, and this is what we've done since. I would really like to see all these things kind of in a little collection and see what different people have been doing, and I think it would be really great, because then one that acknowledges, as a community, we've really embraced where we're going as a culture, and then we can see what other people are doing, and then it also, again, with the whole responsiveness, accessibility, it could show other departments who they can be working with and what they're working on, and we can work together to be really collaborative. Is it something we've talked about? Is it something we could do? Because I think an update being...
I don't think that there would be any difficulty at all. As Dave said, when the president does her objectives for board reporting, they are tied specifically to aspects of the strategic plan.
Yeah.
In turn, when she sets those objectives and the board approves them, she comes to us as the VPs and says, I need information from you about what you're doing in these areas. And I, in turn, go to the deans and say, what are you doing in these areas? So it's all reporting up through to the board on where we're going and the goals and objectives of the strat plan. To bring that together into, say, a midterm report, I think it's a great idea. And we'll
I would
take that
love
forward.
to see that.
Sure.
So
I'd agree. I think it's a great idea. If it's not already in the works, this question...
Well, it sounds like it's already
this
done.
question will put it into the works in a more formal way, which
Yeah.
I think what you look for. Because it was actually amazing, and it was actually, Brian was the coordinator and the author of putting together the results at the end of the last strategic plan and things. And it was amazing. It was actually invigorating to take and look at all of the different things, all the accomplishments that had been made that were directly tied with the last strategic plan. So it not only provides for good good discussion and good information, but I think it provides a bit of morale builder and satisfaction, things to see.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
See how
Everyone likes
much
to
has
brag
actually
about
been
how
done.
awesome
Because,
they're doing, right?
because
Like, we like
it's
to talk
lots.
about it.
Lots in both quantity and quality that the entire academy should be proud of.
And I think Form 2 of that list of accomplishments on the last strategic plan, Memo Machoan, forms the preface, if you like, to Payak Askiki Kawina. It's in the front page or front pages of that document, so it's there, a summary form.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great suggestion, though.
Cool, thanks guys.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Just related to that, will that be reported?
Joe, can you go to the microphone so people can hear you?
Just related to that same point, will that be reported in the U of R annual report, progress on the strategic plan?
Yes.
Seems like the natural
Yes.
place to, and also the public sees it that way
Yes.
too. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. That was Joe Henley from the ministry.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Irwin from the Faculty of MAP. And I have two questions. One related to the province's commitment to education in the province, and the other to the College Avenue campus. The university, I know, has lobbied long and hard at the level of the provincial government to equalize subsidy to students, and I'm not sure I'm using the right word. I don't mean subsidy, but the amount of money that that the government pays to educating each student. And you have told us on a number of occasions that there's a real discrepancy between the University of Saskatchewan
We feel there is in some
and the
spots,
University of Regina. Do you see the province addressing that disparity in any substantive way?
Thank you for that question. It's a complex one because obviously from the perspective of the two campuses as wholes, there's some very expensive programs at Saskatoon such as medicine, veterinary science, dentistry and so on, where the per student cost is naturally very high given the facilities and personnel required. So what we've begun to do over the past 6 months is say let's set those aside and do an apples to apples comparison of, say, the Faculty of Business at Regina and the College of Commerce at the University of Saskatchewan, the respective faculty and College of Kinesiology, the respective faculty and College of Education, and the respective faculty and College of, what have I forgotten? Did I say business, education, engineering is the other one, engineering and applied science. And our question is, given the student counts in those areas, both undergraduate and graduate, what are the faculty counts? What are the number of faculty members? What is the number of APT staff available to support students through advising and other services? What's the number of QP staff to provide QP services within those faculties? And are those appropriate given what we perceive to be gaps between the two universities in some of those areas? Obviously, many of those numbers are contested, and we're in discussion with government right now about how those numbers should be interpreted. It is our feeling that there is material there that needs to be discussed, and we intend to continue that discussion so that basically we can say, as a university, and the government I'm sure will want to say this as well, students at the University of Regina in Program X are funded at a very similar or very equitable way than a student in the same program at the University of Saskatchewan. And that discussion is ongoing.
Good, good.
Hey, one of the things I can confirm, because I'm actually on the steering committee of the Saskatchewan University's funding mechanism and things, and we have a working committee, and it's balanced with respect to U of R and U of S participants and ministry participants, and there is absolutely no doubt that they have heard our comments and our argument, and they're working hard to try and come up with a description and an answer. And as Tom mentions, though, but there's always at least two sides to every argument, and you can be assured that as long and strong as our argument is about our position, you can imagine that there's an equally loud and strong, but from a completely different approach in terms of what the arguments would be to support, say, the U of S position. And the ministry is working hard in the middle to try and get a fair answer.
And one other thing to add here, it's the old chicken and egg problem, amplified by many millions of times. If you have a well-funded institution, forget Saskatchewan for a moment as a province and just say we're talking about some other place. If you have a well-funded institution, you're able to do a number of things. Your teaching loads will be lower on average. Your course sizes will be lower and so on. You will have more time then to devote to research. Your research productivity goes up. Presumably your grant income goes up. But then if you look at an institution where everything is already large, that revenue flowing in from research, and then all of the funding that it attracts because of that high level of research activity amplifies that effect. So where are we right now in the cycle in Saskatchewan? Do we need to look at the chicken? Do we need to look at the egg, as it were? And that's part of this debate as well. Teaching loads in some areas at Regina are higher than they are in the identical area at Saskatoon. And that's something we need to talk about because it affects research productivity, or can affect research productivity, which then affects granting income, and which then affects SUFM.
Thank you very much. My second question is regarding the renewal project on the old campus. And given the timelines that you've sketched out, do you see the building or the renewal being completed in time for Congress?
I can tell you one thing that is 100% certain, is that the federal government will not pay any bill for any bricks and mortar, any work, any activity beyond April 2018. So we'll have passed our spending point, or like our grant allocation by that point. Now, my optimistic answer is yes. Congress is a mere, 6 weeks after that date?
May 26, 27,
Okay,
2018.
3 weeks after that. And so, but that'll be something that we'll be aware of and try and build into the planning. Like if there's components of the campus that are ready to go, like some things we know that won't be for sure, like things like landscaping to take and remediate around definitely will not be guaranteed. But if there's components of the building, boy, it sure would be nice to profile it. And that'll be our goal. It'll be a stretch goal, but that'll be our goal.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
have a nervous feeling, Kathleen, that we'll be out there. If the SIF announcement is positive at the end of the month, we'll be out there with shovels the next morning trying to get the thing started.
I look forward to seeing that.
Is that you volunteering?
Are there any other questions or comments from those present today? Well, yes, please come to the microphone.
I'm Wenliang Li from Department of Physics. I'm last year PhD student. Well, like in the
Good for
last
you.
year. Yes. So if I understand correctly, the first slide you're showing the grant, and there is a reduction in NSERC-related grant and also the research expenditure. So to my naive opinion, I think that reflects kind of reduction or decrease in the research activity branch. I don't know if the committee or your higher level people share the same opinion, and if it is, I just wonder if there is any plan that is to boost that area of decrease in the strategic plan.
Maybe, do you want me to just give a little background about how some of these numbers come from?
I don't really know, so if you can enlighten me.
Sure. First of all, this change, so that in this case, I think you're pointing to the red numbers, the decrease of $153,000. That could arise from the fact that maybe our research activity increased, but the University of Saskatchewan increased more, we would have a negative number. Or even if ours decreased, but theirs decreased less, then more money would flow to them. And so it's our activity relative to their activity. So it's not necessarily indicative of us going up or down. In this particular case, Brian, I think it's both. Is it both going up, but them going up faster?
No, we were down a bit.
We're down year to year?
And they're up a bit.
And they're up a bit year to year. So it takes in, what this formula does is it takes and divides the same size of pie, but in different ways. And so in some respects, the funding formula over the past couple of years has been working in our favor. And as Provost mentioned, it's a 5-year averaging with a 1-year lag is what I'd add. And so things are generally, because of our increases in enrollment and things like that, definitely on the enrollment number, which is the biggest one up there, we should continue to see increases now for a couple of years. So just for those that want to throw out the formula right about now is the time when it's starting to work for us. So just a little bit of background.
Yeah, and then same with research expenditures. We've been increasing research expenditures constantly for the last 3 years, and what this indicates is that U of S, and perhaps it's proportional, Brian, you might be able to answer this question better, but that the U of S is spending more, but then proportionally for example, their research office staff is at least twice the size of ours. I think it's more than twice the size.
And that's actually an interesting point. As the title says, but it wasn't intuitive to me anyway, by a decrease in research expenditure. So we may win a big grant in 1 year, but what gets counted here is when we're spending it. So it may have a lag in it itself as well, that we're actually spending it. So we might be celebrating big time for some gigantic grant, but the formula only kicks in when it's spent, and on top of that, it's a 1 year lag, and on top of that, a 5 year average.
So it is specifically for NSERC, so if I understand correctly, it is for the natural science branch that is we were lagging behind.
This one is.
So is there any plan that is this plan which is to bring us to equal footing to, let's say, U of S, since that? So I was just wondering if there is any. If there isn't any, then
I would love for us to be on equal footing. They're an order of magnitude higher than us, so they're basically 100 million in research funding in this category, and we're barely over 10. And so that's part of our battle. And often the shifts that we see are activity levels at U of S that are jumping all over the place with some really big grants one way or the other. But research profile is definitely a high priority. And if you look at last year's budget, a good portion of the investments and things like that last year were invested in research, and hopefully that starts to bear fruit, or continues to bear fruit.
Yeah, we've increased the amount of graduate funding for students. Clearly it's not enough. I don't think it's ever going to be enough, but that's been constantly increasing. And the research office is working hard on developing new strategies for mentorship of new scholars, of mid-career scholars, to try to get them either on NSERC or back on NSERC. So,
is that the support specifically for the science students or for all students? I just want to clarify.
Well, the research office focuses primarily on faculty. It would be graduate studies that would be offering assistance for graduate students to be applying for, whatever kind of scholarships or funding opportunities they would have.
Right, so that means that the science students is not treated as specifically as any specialties than any other
That's
student.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is no plan, I guess, to change that as well.
Well, in terms of the mentorship of science graduate students, at this point, no.
Okay.
But that's a good point. What I'd love to see FGSR and the research office working much more closely together, because when a professor applies for a grant and a graduate student like yourself is applying for funding, a grant is a grant, and it's a different style of writing, and it's not like writing a paper. So to link the two of them a little bit more closely together would be a positive step, I think.
Yes.
And even though we're focusing, of course, the big red number here is NSERC and things, all of the tri-council agencies and things like that are important. And I suspect, so whether it's SSHRC, as Dave already mentioned, we must have been a similar movement to U of S in SSHRC. It just didn't generate a big difference this year. But that student activity, that research activity is still important to us, as CIHR is and NSERC, so they're all important.
So the target for the big red number there after the next strategic plan, let's say, is the goal to reduce that or to keep it the same level, or to have a modest increase into the negative region on that red big number?
Well, I'd love to be having U of S provide us more funding.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. That's all the questions.
If we could be improving our performance generally and more than U of S, then that's good for the University of Regina.
If you finish that PhD and graduate, see bullet 3?
Yeah, thank you very much.
And that's important. Yeah, the bullet 3 is only when you graduate. You can have lots of students, but if none graduate, we're going to get no money.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Time to completion.
Other questions? Please.
Hi everyone, I'm André Magnan in sociology. I have a really simple question. I haven't heard much about this recently, but the question is, what are we doing to fix our leaky roofs and ceilings, and how might this budget impact the work that needs to be done?
Sure. Thank you very much. Good question and very important part of the institution. As I mentioned, we got the same amount. I think it's 2 slides later. We got the same amount for capital funding this year. So good news, bad news, it's not enough. Out of that 5 million, 3.5 will be going to facilities management to take care of the bricks and mortar. I know that they have a number of roof projects in that plan for this year already. We've had some huge success over the past couple of years, a couple of big roofs that $1 million a copy, or in the case of kinesiology, and estimated 600, but it came in at about, I think, 400 and some for the Language Institute. So lots of roofs have been replaced. In fact, the number of catheters or collection systems and things like that is way down, and we're moving in the right direction, but still important. We can't deliver good research, good teaching, and things like that without good facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no more questions, we want to thank you very much for coming today and spending this time listening to the presentation. Please stay tuned over the next few weeks leading up to the board's decision on the 5th and 6th, and please do come out to the budget town hall plan for the next day at 11 a.m. in Rick, at which point, unless we get a terrible surprise on the 6th from the board, at which point we should be able to give you clear details of the 2016-17 budgets. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.